Hey, tailgaters! Ross of the Pigskin Tales podcast here. Feel that summer heat? It's not just the sun, it's the thrill of upcoming college football season, stoking the coals. So get ready for the season. Dive into the history books with Homefield, the premium collegiate apparel brand from Indianapolis. Homefield crafts incredibly comfortable gear designed with iconic vintage nods over 150 colleges. A library of history right on your chest. Homefield is the Indiana Jones of collegiate apparel, uncovering hidden gems from school archives. Unique mascots, logos, and even unforgettable moments frozen in time. Visit homefieldapparel.com and shop the archives. Homefield Apparel, where comfort, nostalgia, and the spirit of college football history unite. Again, that's homefieldapparel.com.
All right, we're pretty smart as football fans. We know penalty enforcement. We know it's either 15 yards, 10 yards, or 5 yards. But what if I tell you at one time there was a 2-yard penalty? Timothy P. Brown of Football Archaeology digs up on the history of the 2-yard penalty, and he's got the story coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. Darren Hayes, pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And it is Tuesday, and we are going to go into an archaeological dig back in the great history of the gridiron. And our friend Timothy P. Brown of Football Archaeology is leading the way, and we're going to talk about one of his recent tidbits on a penalty enforcement, sort of an odd yardage. Tim, welcome to the Pig Pen.
Hey, good evening, Darren. Good to see you, as always, and to hear your dulcet voice.
Dulcet, boy, that's one of the higher compliments. Usually people say something else about my voice, you know, especially family members. I don't know what's going on with that. So I'll take that.
Well, I only have to listen to you a couple times.
That's true. That's true. Well, Tim, you had a really fascinating tidbit back a couple months ago, and it's on a very odd penalty yardage and under some certain special circumstances in football history that I think maybe we'd like to hear about this story.
Yeah, so this is, everybody knows that 1906 is a big year in terms of changing football rules, introduced forward pass, forward progress, really is kind of fully, not fully developed, but pretty well developed that year. The onside kick from scrimmage, there were just a host of different rule changes. But one that people don't pay much attention to was the rule that limited captains to calling 3 timeouts per half. Now, until then, captains could call as many timeouts as they wanted. There was no rule. But by kind of tradition and practice and, people did the right thing, they didn't call many timeouts. They basically called timeout for injury, and then occasionally if they needed they needed a rest, and this is again back when coaches couldn't coach the players during the game, their teammates couldn't yell instructions to them, nothing. It was, you're out there on your own as a quarterback. So when they introduced that rule in 1906, if a team had called 3 timeouts or had those timeouts called for them by the referee, if they called a 4th timeout, they incurred a 2-yard penalty. So, this is one where, as far as I know, this is the only 2-yard penalty in football history. And there was a caveat that you could, if you had called 3 and you had a player injury, there could be another timeout without penalty. So there could be a 4th due to injury. So, it wasn't called very often, but it was called in 1906 in a game. Indiana was beating Notre Dame. 12-0 late in the game, and Notre Dame called a fourth timeout due to injury, but the referee penalized him. Now, it's unknown at this time, based on newspaper reports, was it because that the ref just made an error, just didn't understand the rule, or because he thought the player was feigning an injury, right? So one way or another, he calls it, and then it kind of, at least in terms of newspaper reports, there's virtually no mention of these 2-yard penalties for another 15 years or so. But then in the early 20s, teams started huddling between plays, and there were a lot of referees and who didn't like teams huddling. They wanted them to keep, immediately lining up on the line, calling the plays at the line, and executing. So some of the referees started calling, penalizing teams for huddling. And again, this is one of these things that's a little bit unclear exactly how they justified it, but it is likely that what they were doing was, a team could huddle 3 times if they wanted to, but if they huddled a 4th time, in effect, the referee was interpreting that as you're taking a timeout, whether you call it or not. I'm basically treating this as a timeout when you huddle, and so the 4th time they huddle, boom, they get a penalty. And so, so that kind of sucked. And Penn got penalized 6 times against Alabama in 1922. So in one game, they got 6 2-yard penalties. So then you sit back and go, how big a deal is a 2-yard penalty? It's just not, it's not that big a deal. And so what teams started doing then is to just say, oh, if I need a break, I'm calling an extra penalty. I don't care. What am I going to do? Lose 2 yards?
Yeah, hell yeah. I mean, especially if you're down, what do you got to go 2 yards or 22 yards? What's the difference?
Yeah. So then obviously the refs and the rule makers didn't like that. So in 1924, they gave teams 4 timeouts per half, but then the 5th one would be a 5-yard loss, and same with 6th, 7th, 8th. So that was the end of the 2-yard penalty. But other than in 1930, 31, in that period, at that point, if there was a penalty on an extra point, if it was committed by the offense lost the ball, and you went to the kickoff process. They didn't get a chance to score. If the defense committed a penalty, then the offense was credited with having made the extra point. And so they changed that in 31, and so they just changed it so that the whatever penalties were incurred, the refs walked off whatever the typical whatever penalty yards they would have done during regular play. So half the way to the goal line, or you had a 15-yard penalty, you got moved back to the 17, whatever it was at the time. So so the 2-yard penalty led a fairly short life, but
I always wonder that, because usually the penalty is it fits the bill for the whatever the foul was, and they try to balance that out, and they've tweaked things around a little bit, and maybe they over penalized certain things over the years. But a 2-yard penalty, like we said earlier, there's really no penalty to it. What's a big deal. The other thing I found interesting, when I started officiating in the late 80s, that's when teams were just now starting to go to no huddle. Jim Kelly and the Bills were having some success at the pro level, and it was going right down to levels. And there were some older officials, especially umpires, who like to have time to set that ball, get set 7 yards off the ball behind the linebackers, so they're in a safe place. Well, they have these teams going up the line. They're having to drop that ball down and beat feet and get out of there before they get smoked. And if the referee was blowing the ready for play too early, that ball's getting snapped and things. So I can remember people, officials standing up at meetings, when you have big rules meetings with the local coaches and all the local officials, when all the new rules, you have the same interpretation. So we're all on the same page. At least that's what we did in Pennsylvania at the time. And, there's referees saying, hey, there should be a penalty for this. What do you mean? No, you aren't huddling. Yeah. So it's funny how, what is it? 50, 60 years later, we're looking the exact opposite way. We're expecting teams to huddle, and when they don't, we get mad.
Yeah. Well, I've got I haven't written it yet, but I'm going to do a tidbit on, I'm sure you've seen it's a 1903 2 or 3 minute film of Yale and Princeton playing. And so it's the first instance in which a football team is captured playing football. And so that little film document, and anybody can find it on YouTube. If you just put in like 1903 Princeton Yale football movie or something like that, you'll find it right away. And like the first part of it just shows guys running around and coming out of the locker rooms or whatever. But once you get into the actual play, they execute a play and immediately get on the ball. And then running, the quarterback call signals, boom, run another play. And so, that's just evidence of how they did that at the time. And that's because that's what they did in rugby. Yeah. Somebody, got tackled or whatever, they set the ball down and boom, you just get going again. You line up and play. And so there was no rule about that. The rule about 25 seconds or 30 seconds, that didn't come into play until like 1926 or so because of huddling, right? I mean, they wanted to make sure that the pace of play remained somewhat normal, but until then, it was all just tradition. That's how you played football. You got up and you played. It's kind of like pitch count or the pitch clock kind of a thing. It's gotten so crazy that now they need to have a timer to stop players from, rubbing their nuts for 2 minutes up there at the plate,
All right.
So anyway, it's, if you think about it, those are really two kind of interesting. It's an interesting parallel, the pitch clock versus the ready for play and, 25 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever it is, depending on the league.
You're right. There's another early film. It's got to be that same. I think it's 1903. Also, there's a Michigan film out there too.
Yeah, Michigan, Chicago in 04.
Right. Same thing, but of course that's the point a minute teams of Fielding Yost going on there too. So, but I can remember there's one play in there where the guy gets hurt and he's at the bottom of the pile, and they're in such a hurry to keep the game going. They just drag him by his legs off the sideline, and play's going off a second later.
And that happened all the time, just because there was no substitution at that point. Guys would be laying there on the side of the, in the backfield. They'd lay there for a minute or two and play'd continue. Just nuts.
Yeah, I keep meaning I got to load up some of those YouTubes of that we'll put them on the site here in the next couple of weeks because they're interesting to see. And so listeners, you can check them out there, or go to, I know Library of Congress has them, YouTube has them. They're public domain, so they're real easy to get to. So, well, Tim, that's a fascinating story on this 2-yard penalty and the history of it, and its evolution. And thank God it's riddance out of the game of football. And you have a lot of different little stories like this that are sort of off the beaten path, but really vital parts of football history that were important in the era that they happened. And we sure are glad that you're going back and looking at these and researching them and giving all the facts each and every night on something. So if you could, maybe you could share with the listeners how they could share in these tidbits that you put out each night also.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's my site is footballarchaeology.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Football Archaeology. So, on Twitter, it's going to be kind of hit or miss whether you see what I post or not. Whereas if you subscribe on the website, you'll get an email every night with the with that night's post. And then obviously you can always just go to the site, and there is a search function there. If there's a specific topic in football history that you're interested in, just go in there and put in the keywords, see if you find anything. If you don't, shoot me in the message, and I'll, maybe it's out there and you just didn't find it, or didn't enter the right words. But happy to, always looking for topics, always looking for new things to or old things to research.
Yeah, right. The new old things. Yeah. So, all right, Timothy P. Brown, footballarchaeology.com. Make sure you check out his site and his tidbits each and every day, and listen to him each and every Tuesday right here on pigskindispatch.com. Tim, thanks a lot, and we will talk to you again next week.
Great. Thank you again, Darren.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Each week, the official Football Learning Academy podcast will take you deep into the history of pro football through interviews with players, coaches, or administrators in the NFL, as well as interviews with Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors, authors, and historians. You'll learn how the game evolved and important moments that shaped the sport into what it is today. And don't miss the Pro Football History Nugget of the Week. Listen to the official Football Learning Academy podcast on the Sports History Network.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.